Welcome to the Essential Skills for Humaning podcast, where we explore the fundamental abilities and insights that make us better humans. Here's your host, Christina Eanes.
Hi everyone, Christina Eanes here. We're so glad you joined us for this episode of Essential Skills for Humaning. Today we are welcoming Dr. Sharon Spano. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you so much for having me here today, Christina. I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, before we jump into the pursuit of time and money, which I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to hear about, can you share a little bit about your background?
Well, it's been a long journey, so that's a big question. But I would say my work started out in advocacy early in my life because I had a son that was born with a very rare metabolic disorder. So that kind of catapulted me into systems change, if you will. Even though I wasn't aware of it at the time, I was just trying to find services for my boy. And then that evolved into an amazing speaking career all across North America. I got my PhD, as you know, in human and organizational systems. I have several masters, just a lot of extensive training and certifications as I moved in and out of corporate America, again, across North America and very high level Fortune 500 companies. And the journey's just evolved from there. Now I'm doing much deeper transformational work. And I've got a lot of background in trauma because I find that many high achieving leaders have some level of trauma in their background that has catapulted them to succeed, which has been an interesting piece of my work and my research. And then the book, of course, my work is grounded in human development and human and organizational systems, as I said. And so I wrote the book some years ago because I was curious about how people from different stages of human development, there are 12 stages that we know of today based on the research, how they experience both time and money. And the work has just continued to grow from there. I'm now working with high achievers who somehow find themselves feeling unsatisfied or stuck in their lives and their career with all of the rapid changes, as I know your show is about that. We're seeing more and more of that. So the work has evolved into very, very much transformational work, as well as looking at organizational structures and strategy and, business growth and those kinds of things. So I feel very blessed. I love my work. I love my clients. And it's just a wonderful season of life.
Oh, I love it. It does sound rewarding. It's a good place to
Very
be.
much.
Yes.
Yeah, very much so.
I didn't think about this before, right? Time and money being so, I know we say time is money. Yeah, some folks do, right? I didn't think of them being so, what do I want to say, intersected? So can you share a little bit about how this came to be for your book?
Yeah, well, what I began to see, Christina, was that people either had a lot of time and no money because they weren't producing or didn't have the clients or their business, wasn't doing well, whatever, or they had a lot of money and no time because they were working so hard and producing. And so I was curious because we talk about time, we talk about money, but we very rarely talk about the two of them. And what kind of spearheaded the desire to understand it better was, these two resources are so deeply intersected, and we make dozens and dozens of decisions really just almost at a subconscious level on a daily basis based on, do I have enough time? Do I have enough money? And so I just wanted to explore it further. And one of the things that I discovered that was so interesting to me was that people at different stages, and we can talk more about that if we have the time, they do experience time and money differently. And so I think it's just a really important thing to understand about yourself because I think we all know, even in marriage and relationships, that can be a very push-pull tension in any relationship. And often it's because you're at different stages and therefore experience those two resources very differently and think about them differently.
I love that because perspective, it literally creates our reality, right? So can you share, can you share a little bit more about the stages and maybe the adult ones that typically maybe mostly US folks are in and how that relates to their perspectives?
Yeah, well, when we think of the stages, just think about it as our way of being, because the stages, based on over 7 years of research really encompass how we think, our worldview, our personality structure, our leadership style, our communication style. It's just all of who we are. And it comes out of the early work of Piaget when he started to study early childhood development. And so we now see again that there are 12 stages. I think the numbers keep changing a little bit, but roughly 68% of the American workforce, as I like to say, are at stage 5 or 6. And the stages are named different things depending on different theorists. The model and the framework that I use, we talk about those stages as the expert, which is where we often find a lot of our technical people, engineers, financial advisors, even though it's not directly linked to specific categorical professions, we do see some connections there. And then the achiever stage is often where we see people chasing time and money like crazy. Those are your entrepreneurs, those high achievers and those business leaders, And so, that's where we are as Americans, who are out there in corporate America or, entrepreneurial efforts. But then it goes on from there. And not one stage is not better than the other. We want to be very careful to say that. It just is where we are. But the point is, and what I really would love your audience to understand, especially if they're feeling kind of stuck or frustrated in their careers or their lives, is that we often, we can live a very robust life at whatever stage we're at. It's important to know what stage you're at. But then if you're feeling stuck, it's often, and I see this so often in my clients, is they're leaning into what we like to say, leaning into another stage. And so they maybe success is starting to feel, a little empty. Maybe I've got all the toys and the house and the cars and I'm traveling, but is that all there is, kind of thing? And that's often because within the stages, there are what we call lines of development. So that's your cognitive, your mental, your social, your moral, your spiritual. So you'll see people wanting something more, and often it's because the spiritual line is not quite developed to the level that it could be. So that's kind of a brief, it's very complex, but mainly for people to understand that you're not going crazy. I think years ago it was probably labeled as a middle-age crisis. No, it's actually an opportunity for growth and transformation. And you may need someone to walk alongside you to help you through that process. Most of us do because we can't see, our own subconscious, obviously. But it's just a very exciting time in life. And I really am passionate about people understanding that maybe in those sticky moments, it's really a joyful opportunity for you to explore yourself a little bit deeper.
I love it. Well, and I love that a foundation of your book is self-awareness. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, I mean, that's the foundation of my work because, for instance, I was talking to a client the other day, and it's a long process of what I do with these people in my Potential Unleashed intensive. But he was saying, "Why aren't you asking me to change?" And I said, "Because if I asked you to change, you would try to change, but you wouldn't know what the change should look like, and you would boggle the whole thing. It would make you very frustrated, and you'd probably do a lot of dumb things." So what I'm teaching them is how to self-witness. And there's a way that we do that so that they can start to develop that awareness of the internal landscape and how it's affecting their external moves and behaviors in the world. And what happens, Christina, that is so beautiful is just by watching. I often say, pretend you're the director behind the camera and you're watching yourself on the scene. Just by watching, they have such aha moments that they quite naturally begin to make the changes, some quicker than others, but it's beautiful to see. And I can tell when they report back to me, how their week went, that, they really did see something. And then there'll be a shift in consciousness where they start to think about their own behaviors, the people in their lives differently, what is really meaningful to them. And it's just beautiful. I mean, it is the joy of my work is to watch that transformation happen.
I love that. Yeah. Well, and it's so empowering to notice your thoughts. Stop and notice your thoughts in the moment. Like you had mentioned in the book. Well, with time, money, food, anything that someone has some, I don't know, stories around, right? To notice is guilt popping up. Why am I looking to eat a bag of chips right now? Why do I feel like I need to buy that fifth dress at the store or suit or whatever, right? So noticing, I love that. And that's a huge takeaway. A lot of people think, wait, what? Just noticing my thoughts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because most of us, we don't have awareness of our thoughts. We think they're real. We think they're
Yes.
concrete. And really, they can change with the wind based on, I mean, that's what separates us from the reptiles, right? So
Hmm.
we talk about having awareness in the moment because most of the time, if you think about, I'll use this simple example, maybe I say something stupid in a meeting and I feel shame about it later. And I'm like, why did I do that again? Why did I, counter my boss again and make a fool of myself? So it's after the fact, and then I feel shame and guilt. What I'm teaching my clients is pay attention in the moment, no judgment, no shame, no guilt. Just notice what happened. And then eventually, as I develop that higher states of consciousness, I can self-correct in the moment. I can self-regulate in the moment. And then eventually I just stop doing those crazy things all along. Not to say that I won't have a moment of regression when I'm under stress, but I can self-correct a lot quicker. And that's the beauty of it, is taking the stress off of myself in certain environments, rather than self-inflicting pain and suffering, and feeling guilt and shame over things that we actually have control over.
Yeah. I also like too that you mentioned in a way about how this takes time, it takes effort, it takes intention. If not putting these words in your mouth, but I think if anyone is like, hey, here's a checklist you just need to do and you'll be great, don't listen to that. You share a little bit more about the effort?
Well, it's funny you bring that up because I was having the same conversation with the client the other day, a different client who we were talking about peak experiences. Like, there's a lot going on right now with mushrooms and all those things. And I think there's a time and a place. I mean, I don't know much about those modalities, but I hear people have had good experiences. But then what happens is they come back to me and go, oh, but we're losing what we used to be. I want that. I want that again. They want that peak experience. So that's the difference between states. We can self-induce a state through drugs, alcohol, mushrooms, whatever it is, maybe smelling a rose, but it's momentary. Now, it may open up a doorway for us, but it's different from the stages, which is a trajectory, a developmental path, if you will, that does take some time and effort and intention, because, we're not just transformed from one type of human being to another. For most of the people I work with, and I'm sure yourself, they have a history of success and they have evidence that who they are works for them. And so those are habits that are not easy to break. And I'm just saying, we talk about it in my field as your current way of being, what works for you. Let's look at what doesn't. And
Mm-hmm.
then what is the new way of being you desire? And then we develop that path to get to that place. And that's what the transformational journey sort of looks like. Not saying you're wrong, you're bad, you're horrible. We hear enough of that, I think, in our lives from
Yeah.
school age on. But to say who you are is just who you are, and let's look at where we can polish up some things a little bit better and do a little shadow work maybe to get rid of some of the stuff that's not serving you or the people you love very well.
Nice. It's like putting the judge away and getting curious. Put the
Yes,
curious scientist in there.
yes, yes.
Nice. Now, I love in your book too, you also go from scarcity, moderate, abundant. Can you share a little bit more about that? The
Yeah,
mindsets.
that was interesting because when we did just the preliminary research, we didn't know what was going to come out of the questions. We asked people certain questions and then we started to categorize them and do all the work there. And we saw that kind of spectrum. I mean, scarcity was obvious, abundance was fairly obvious. What was most interesting to me was the moderate scarcity and the moderate abundance. And I've said this often on other shows because they look almost the same in terms of the action. What was different behind them was the intention. So the moderate scarcity was those people are making decisions based on fear. And I'll give you an example in a minute that's very concrete. And then the moderate abundance, they're making decisions based on abundant mindsets of I can create more as I need to. So the example I like to use is saving for retirement. I had one gentleman that I interviewed who was fairly, in his earlier part of his career, I can't remember exactly, maybe late 30s, and he was saving for retirement to the point where vacations were out. not taking my
Wow.
kids to Disneyland or anything. And he lived in Orlando, which to me was like, whoa, you're not living your life. I mean, retirement, you might get by a bus tomorrow and not ever get to use it,
Yeah.
right? Where the moderate abundance is doing all the right things to prepare for the future, but also living life along the way and not as fear-based in the decisions. I always say to my clients, a fear-based decision in my mind is not a decision because it's based on emotion, not factual information. So, we want to gather the data and make wise choices and be good stewards of our resources, but not to the point where we're in bondage to either time or money, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I like how you broke it out looking at time and money separately as well as together. And I didn't even think about, well, I'm like way on abundance and time and I'm like moderate abundance maybe on money. So thinking about, can you talk about a little bit about those differences?
Yeah, well, for the most part, I think what we saw, because the question was, what did you learn? One of the questions, what did you learn about time and or money from your parents?
Mm-hmm.
And the messages, people could go right there. My mom was adamant we could never be late about anything, but my dad was one who believed just let's have a good time and we'll spend what we spend and I'll earn more. So sometimes people get mixed messages from the parents that cause that kind of paradoxical thinking. But often, and most often, I think we saw people, again, if they had issues with one, they had issues with the other. I
Yeah.
don't feel I have enough time. I never feel I have enough money, that kind of a thing. So again, not right or wrong, but just to notice, like, how are these perceptions, these beliefs, these early childhood narratives impacting your here and now? Because it's quite interesting. I, for instance, come from a family of scarcity. We were very, very poor, and there was never enough. But we didn't know we were poor. I mean, I didn't know we were poor. That was just life.
Yeah.
But it made me, for many, many years, I've struggled with. My husband is total abundance. Just, we're going to go on the best vacation, and I'll create more. He's a true entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm more prudent in some ways. And, he's going to buy a first class ticket and I'm not. I'm going to sit and coach,
Mm-hmm.
And so he makes the airline reservations. I handle the hotels. We have learned, how to meld our two differences around both time and money. And it seems to work. We've been together a very long time, but I struggle with things like, why am I going to pay for a ticket to sit up front? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go for points if I can. Just points, because I don't want to pay that extra money to sit up front and have a meal when we're all going to get there at the same time, is how I think about it.
But enjoy the experience of getting there, right? No, I'm
Well,
just
that's how he thinks about it. And we were visiting some friends out in California, and if he hadn't been in first class, he got us in first class to California. And I was so grateful because our connecting flight was late and the food was great, and we'd have been exhausted and probably missed that flight if it hadn't been for him. So, but it's a battle,
yeah.
because it's in you. It's in you from those early years. But the difference is to have awareness of it and relax and go, okay, I'm being crazy right now. I'm being my mother right now. So I need to just, back up here and be okay with where we're going.
I like that. Well, because speaking of relationships, I'm going to ask two questions at once for your realization of what's coming. One, what I'm trying to say, the best way when people are in completely different areas that they can find either compromise or collaborate, one of those two. And then the second one is, people may think that if you're in alignment, that's awesome, but what could be some of the downfalls of that?
Yeah, those are good
So
questions.
whichever one you want to answer first.
Well, the first one, I think, because I do a lot of relationship work, both in business and personally, because I find I'm not one that thinks you can separate out your life. We're whole beings.
Right.
So usually if I'm working with a CEO, we're going to wind up doing something about whatever else is going on in his life. I work very closely in the systemic world, meaning I'm not just looking at the concrete systems in an organization, your marketing, your financial, the things we all know and do well. I'm looking at the dynamics in the human systems. And so I teach people very specific principles and ways to look at what is going on in the system, because the system has its own life. and the system never lies. So for instance, rather than make it about me versus you, we look at what are the patterns in the system? What is happening here? Well, every time we go on a trip, Sharon has an issue with the airline tickets. Okay, well, what is that about for Sharon? And it's not, again, so much about Sharon as a person, but the bigger system. It's the family system. It's the generations before. So we do a lot of work looking at, genograms and who came before and where did these paradigms come from within you such that they're now causing you maybe some tension or even chaos in your relationship. And
Yeah.
that shifts people very, very quickly because it makes it at some level less personal and more about the energy, as woo-woo as that might sound, but there's energy in every system, right? I mean, our world is energy. And so we look at what is the energy in that system and the patterns around it. And when people can identify the patterns, which is part of my role, is to help them see the patterns because it's hard to see our own, um, they immediately can figure out, okay, what do I do about that now? That kind of a thing. But generational work, I think, is very, very important, not necessarily in a therapeutic sense, but just to look at the family system and the organizational system and what's really happening there. So that's how I think of that. The second question you asked me, I'm sorry again.
Oh, no, no worries. It was if in a relationship, if you're both aligned, like on your
Yeah.
mindsets and your viewpoints, a lot of people think, oh, that's great, but there can be
Yeah.
some downfalls to watch out for. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right about that because you can almost fall into a micro version of groupthink, where you lose your sense of self and you're just kind of going along with the other person without critical thinking, and that to me could be a downfall because it could stunt your progress, it could stunt your sense of adventure. I mean, I'll go back to our situation with our son that when my son passed away in 2008, and he was wheelchair bound his entire life. Now, my husband comes from a family that they go to the same place on vacation for a million years, like San Diego, boom. And I just could not wrap my head around that because I'm too curious. And I wanted my son to have as many experiences in his life as possible. So both my son and I kind of pushed my husband, like, we want to go here, we want to try this, we want to try. They weren't elaborate vacations, but sometimes just let's go to a different city. And
Yeah,
that really, I think, is a simple example of how my husband expanded his awareness of different cultures. He now loves to travel to different places, but it still comes up where, well, let's do the same thing we did last year. And I'm like, no, we're blessed to be able to travel, and I want to see a different. I don't care if it's just a town. Actually, we're leaving, as I mentioned to you, I'm in North Carolina. We're heading to Florida on Tuesday, and I want to stop along the way in a different town to visit this little southern town just overnight. And he wants to go to the same place.
mm,
So it's kind of like I like to think that, if we just went along with each other, even in these daily lesser moments, it would be a lot more of a boring life.
yeah,
But then, if you think for most of us in the larger context of our work and, our businesses, and I think it just expands the opportunities.
yeah. Yeah, we need different thinkers in our lives to help us uncover our own patterns, right? And to help us
Right.
expand.
Right.
Yeah, nice.
And critical thinking. I mean, that to me is so needed right now in the way the world is. And I like to think, I help my clients do that. I know I help my husband do that. I know he helps me do that because we have different backgrounds. So, we will ask each other questions that cause us to rethink maybe our position. I
Nice.
think that's really helpful.
Yeah. Critical thinking, systems thinking. I love it. We need to round ourselves out a little more.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, before we get to your final piece of advice, can you share a little bit about products and/or services, how people can get the book, etc.?
Well, thank you so much. You can get the book through Amazon or on my website. It's The Pursuit of Time and Money, and it's really about stepping into radical abundance, and I describe what that is. And then on my website, we will have an appearance page specific to you, and that is sharonspano.com/essential skills. And why I mention that is not only for the podcast, but also then at the bottom of that page, we have a quick, fun assessment quiz, if you will, that I developed called the Leader's Edge. And it looks at the 6 main stages that we see in corporate America. Because the earlier stages are obviously, birth to adolescence. That doesn't apply. But I've got questions in there, and then we give a little report to help you kind of get a sense of what we call the center of gravity. We're never one thing all of the time, but where you land in the stages is kind of your main perspective. And then it gives you some ways to think about it and maybe some action steps to take if you're feeling kind of stuck. So that's a great piece. I'm really excited about that. We put a lot of time into it. And then there's information on there about how to book a discovery call with me. If anyone is interested, I offer several things, the Leader's Edge Masterclass, but also my one-on-one Potential Unleashed Intensive is a 12-week process that people need to apply for. So I love doing that deeper work with people. But the Leader's Edge Masterclass is a group opportunity. So thank you for asking. All of that on my website, sharonspano.com.
Awesome. We'll make sure both those links get into the episode description.
Thank you so much.
Okay, final piece of advice for our listeners.
Well, there's a lot. I think I've already mentioned, like, if you're feeling stuck, know that it's a developmental opportunity. Yeah. But I think the thing that I'm running up against most now, Christina, with the pace of the world we're working in, is people being torn between family and their businesses or their careers. So I would really say just to be careful that you're not sacrificing your family for your career, your business. I mean, that's a hard one. We've all been there, done that. But I will say from my personal experience, I was telling someone the other day that you think you're doing everything right. My son was critical for 4 years. And of course I kept working because you have clients and a business and you have to pay for this crazy insurance premium and whatnot. But sometimes I do look back and think, oh, if I had known that he had 3 months to live or 6 months to live, I would have quit everything and just spend that extra time with him. No shame or guilt about it, but it is a thought that comes to me. And when I see fathers particularly telling me, I'm not connecting with my kids because I'm never there. It's a hard balancing act, I know, but just to be aware that those moments can't be regained. So that's my final piece, is never sacrifice your family for your career, your business.
Oh, that's amazing advice. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me here today. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for tuning in to the Essential Skills for Humaning podcast. We hope you've gained valuable insights to enhance your journey as a human being. Remember, practice makes progress. Keep honing those essential skills, and until next time, keep being the best version of yourself. For more resources, visit eanestraining.com.